rivers flow to the sea because they are lower than it. Humility gives you power. Lao Tzu, the river, never spoke, but it had a memory. Ananda sat beneath the shade of a Bodhi tree, his fingers tracing the rim of the wooden bowl in his lap. The morning sun stretched gently across the water, casting long golden ribbons that danced on its surface. The breeze was soft, barely enough to lift the hem of his saffron robe. Birds chirped in slow rhythm, as if nature itself had learned to breathe alongside him. He had lived by this river for 37 years. His hut was simple, thatched roof, clay walls, and a small prayer shrine of stacked stones, and a single carved statue of the Buddha. No one visited him unless they had lost something. Some came to pray for healing. Others came to weep. But most came to forget. Ananda never judged them. He, too, had come here long ago, not to be found, but to disappear. He turned the bowl in. His hands, it was old, worn smooth by time and use. The wood was darkened with age, the rim chipped from a fall he no longer remembered. It wasn't beautiful, but it was ... sacred. Not because it had been blessed, not because it held relics, but because it had held his hands, his hunger, his solitude. It was the only thing he had brought with him from the monastery. The monastery. It was now a ghost behind his eyes, faint, distant, but never fully gone. He had once been the youngest disciple, eager, wide-eyed, always asking, always running ahead of the other monks during walking meditation. His master, Venerable Dhammayoti, used to chuckle and say, "Ananda, one day you will learn that the path cannot be outrun." He had not believed him then, but now, at 64, with a bent back and aching knees, Ananda no longer ran. He walked, he watched, he breathed, and he listened mostly to the river. Every morning, he would descend the stone steps carved into the riverbank, fill his bowl with water, splash it on his face, then hold it against his heart before drinking. The ritual was not required by any scripture. It wasn't taught by any teacher. It had simply become his own form of remembering. One morning, perhaps, this very one, perhaps a memory from some past morning he could no longer separate from. The present Ananda sat on the step just above the river's edge and felt an ache, not physical, not emotional, but something quieter, like an echo without a sound. He looked at the bowl again. A thought passed through him, light as a feather. What happens when I lose this? He didn't like the question. It didn't feel right to fear losing something so small, so simple. But the thought had come, and thoughts like river water have a way of carving through stone. That evening, after meditation, a young traveller arrived at his hut. She was no more than 30, her hair tied back in a frayed ribbon, her eyes clouded with the weight of recent grief. "I heard there's a monk who listens," she said. Ananda smiled gently and gestured toward the stone bench. Beside the tree, "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You already have," he replied. She wept for a while. He let her. The river too was weeping tiny ripples under the moonlight, a wind moving unseen. When she finally spoke again, it was not to ask for answers. It was to remember her mother. Her voice cracked on every third word, and her hands trembled as if the memories themselves were trying to escape her. Ananda did not speak. He only placed his bowl beside her. She looked at it, confused. "Your offering?" she asked. He shook his head. "My mirror." She stared at him, then at the bowl again. Her eyes softened, and she wept once more, but this time without fear. Later, as the moon rose higher and the traveller fell asleep beneath the Bodhi tree, Ananda took the bowl back into his hands. He held it carefully, reverently, like one would a candle in the dark. This bowl had been with him through silence and storm. It had caught rainwater in the dry season, carried rice offered by strangers, even once held the ashes of a dying squirrel. He had buried beneath a fig tree. It was more than wood. It was witness. But everything breaks, even witness, even monks, even memories. The next morning arrived quietly. The traveller was gone before the sun had touched the tops of the trees, leaving behind only the faint impression of her presence, a folded cloth. A few fallen tears dried into the stone bench, and the memory of her voice still floating gently in the air like incense smoke. Ananda sat for a long time in the hush of dawn, bowl in his lap, the river before him. He felt the day rising, not just in the sky, but inside his chest, the kind of stillness that only comes before something changes, and something would. He descended the steps to the water slowly, his bare feet brushing over the smooth stone, the early dew chilling his soles. The river welcomed him with its usual indifference, flowing, constant, unaware of time. He knelt at the edge and dipped the bowl into the stream. He always did it gently, careful not to let the current tug it away. The bowl filled quickly, the rippling water making tiny noises, like a child's whisper. He pulled it back, toward him, then stopped, for a reason he couldn't name. He stared into it longer than usual. The surface reflected not just his face, but his face layered with the sky, clouds floating where his eyes should be, a bird cutting. Across his brow, he watched as his image wavered, then settled, then wavered again. No stillness could last forever. Then came a gust of wind, sudden and sharp. His hand, already trembling from age, loosened its grip. The bowl slipped. It did not fall quickly. It tilted, rocked. Then, with a barely audible splash, it tipped into the river and drifted just beyond reach. Ananda lunged, his hand plunging into the cold water, sweeping in wide arcs. But his fingers met only current and emptiness. The bowl spun once, caught the sunlight like a bell-catching sound, and floated away, bobbing lazily, as if in no hurry to leave. But refusing to come back, he stood. He followed it for a few paces down the bank, but the rocks were slick, and his knees protested. Within moments, the bowl rounded a bend and vanished into a fold of overhanging reeds. Gone. Anda sat down hard on the stones, his breath shallow, the water licking at his toes. He stared into the river as if it owed him something, but it owed him nothing. He knew this, and yet he felt something in his chest, a crack. Not loud, not sharp, but deep. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out like a sigh that had forgotten its way. What was he mourning, really? It was just a bowl, a piece of wood, a thing. But the grief was real, sharp, unreasonably sharp. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind them, the past stirred. He was young again, 12 years old, kneeling on the floor of the monastery's kitchen, hands trembling as the head monk placed the wooden bowl into his palms for the first time. "You are now responsible for what you carry," the master had said. "Not just this bowl, but all the space it holds." At the time, Ananda had not understood. He had nodded, bowed, and rushed out to show the other boys. But over the years, the lesson had grown inside the bowl itself, like time seeped into wood. Every grain, every scratch, every mark held a chapter of his life. It had been with him when he sat beside his dying friend in the rainy season. It had been with him when he left the monastery in silence, carrying nothing else but prayer beads and a folded robe. It had been his witness, and now it was gone. He opened his eyes. The river was the same. The river did not grieve. The river did not cling. The river only carried hours past. He did not move. The sun rose high, and the shadows shrank. His stomach growled once, then stilled. He paid no attention. At some point, a dragonfly landed on his shoulder, lingered, then lifted away. Still he sat, still he waited. For what an answer, a return. He didn't know. He only knew that something had left, and something else had awakened. In the space it left behind by late afternoon, clouds had begun to gather. The air thickened, the wind coiled. He stood slowly, bones creaking like ancient floorboards, and made his way back to the hut inside. Everything looked smaller. He sat before the shrine. No bowl to place before it now. No water to offer. No rice. Just empty hands resting in his lap like two quiet birds. He looked at the statue of the Buddha, not made of gold or marble, just clay, cracked in places from time and temperature. He whispered aloud, "I am trying to understand." The Buddha said nothing, but that silence was full that night. He dreamed of the river, not as it was, but as it once had been, or perhaps as it had always been, in the world behind this one. The bowl was there, floating in reverse, moving back upstream, moving toward him. But when he reached out, it passed through his hands like light through mist. He awoke with tears on his cheeks. The next morning, he did not go to the river. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, staring into the empty space in front of him. He began to wonder if it was truly loss he was feeling, or fear. Not fear of lacking, but fear of what the loss revealed. How attached he had become to an object, to memory, to identity. He remembered something his master had once said during a rainy season retreat. A bowl, a robe, a name, none of it is you. But cling to it long enough and you will forget the difference. He inhaled deeply, letting the air fill the hollow inside his chest. He exhaled slowly, letting it leave, unforced, ungrasped. He whispered again to no one in particular, "I am still here," and the wind answered. The third morning came like a whisper. Ananda opened his eyes before the sun did. The edges of the world still painted in soft shades of blue and grey. There was no urgency to rise, no ritual to attend, no bowl to carry. Just breath, just the dull ache that had taken residence somewhere between his ribs and his spine. Not entirely grief, not entirely emptiness, but something quieter, something still forming a name. He sat cross-legged in the doorway of his hut, wrapped in his thin shawl, and listened. The wind moved through the leaves like a sigh. A single bird sang a hesitant melody from the fig tree. Far off, the river continued its endless chant, that low, eternal murmuring of water meeting earth. He wondered if the river missed the bowl. He almost laughed at the thought, and then realized, for the first time in days, he was capable of laughing again. The past rose like steam. He remembered another morning, many decades ago, when the rains had flooded the lower fields and turned the monastery grounds into a patchwork of small, glistening lakes. The young monks had squealed like ducklings, leaping barefoot into the water. Ananda had done the same, only to slip and fall flat on his back, soaking his robes and splashing the head monk. Everyone froze, but Venerable Domyoti had simply smiled and said, "You have fallen into water. Be thankful it is not fire. Now learn to float." Ananda could still remember the warmth of that moment, the the forgiveness, the gentle wisdom disguised as humor. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Master." There was no answer. There never was. And yet, something in the silence felt like presence as the day warmed. Ananda decided to walk, not toward the river, not into the forest, but simply away. Not with purpose, but with awareness. He followed the old path, worn into the earth by decades of footsteps, his animals, perhaps even strangers, passing through when the rains closed, other roads. His staff tapped gently on the soil, with each step echoing the rhythm of his breath. After nearly an hour, he paused near a bend in the path where a fallen log served as a natural bench. He sat, letting his legs rest, his mind empty. Then came the footsteps, soft, measured, and not his own. He turned his head slightly and saw a figure approaching, wrapped in dusty orange robes, head shaved, face young but weathered, a fellow monk, but not one he knew. The stranger bowed lightly before him. Ananda returned the bow. "Peace to you, elder," the young monk said, his voice steady but gentle. "May I sit?" "You already have," Ananda replied, patting the log beside him. They sat in silence. The forest made the only conversation, leaves rustling, insects buzzing, a woodpecker knocking gently on some distant trunk. After several minutes, the young monk asked, "You are the one who lives by the river. I am the one the river tolerates," Ananda said with a faint smile. The monk nodded. "I've heard stories." Ananda shrugged. "Stories are more patient than people." Another silence passed. Then, almost shyly, the young monk asked, "Is it true that you've lived alone for 40 years?" Ananda considered the question. Then he said, "Alone is a word for people who forget how full silence can be." The young monk looked down. "I struggle with silence." "You're not alone in that," Ananda said. "Most people hear silence and try to fill it. Few ever listen to what it's saying." The monk was quiet again, as if testing the truth of those words by remaining still. After some time, Ananda asked, "What brings you through these woods?" The monk hesitated. "Then I lost something." Ananda's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Then perhaps we are brothers." The young monk chuckled, though there was sadness in the sound. "I lost my master," he said. 3 moons ago, illness." Ananda bowed his head. "Grief is not a sign of ignorance," he said softly, "only of love." "I've tried to accept it," the young monk continued. "I tell myself he's part of the Dharma, that nothing is permanent, that everything is the path, but it feels hollow when I say it." Ananda nodded slowly. "Truth is not always a bomb. Sometimes it must burn first." The younger monk looked surprised. "I thought you were known for being peaceful." Ananda smiled. "Even peace has teeth, gentle ones, but sharp." The two sat in stillness again. Then Ananda said, "Would you like to hear a story?" The monk nodded. Ananda's eyes turned to the forest canopy. "There was once a bowl," he began, "carved from a fallen tree, passed down from master to disciple. Not because it was special, but because it had survived. It bore the stains of use, the scratches of time, and the scent of memory." He told the story simply, no embellishment, no drama, just the truth, just the way it happened. The monk listened, eyes lowered, hands folded in his lap. When Ananda finished, the young monk was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "And what do you think the bowl was teaching you in the end?" Ananda thought, then said, that what we carry can carry us, but only until we're ready to walk on our own. The young monk smiled. They bowed to each other, and without a word, he stood and continued down the path, his footsteps already lighter. Ananda remained seated. The breeze picked up slightly, bringing with it the faint scent of river water. He did not turn toward it. Instead, he placed his hands on his knees and whispered, "Perhaps the bowl knew what I did not." Ananda left his hut at sunrise. He took nothing but his staff. No food, no bowl, no intention. There was no path, only direction, away, not toward the river, not toward the mountains, simply away from the things he thought he needed to be himself. His bare feet pressed into the earth, cool with dew, each step a quiet promise. I will walk until I no longer need to arrive. The forest opened before him like a breath held too long. Trees swayed in rhythm, with a breeze older than memory. The morning light filtered through the branches in soft slivers, catching on spider webs and the trembling edges of bamboo leaves. Birds sang with no audience, no stage, only purpose. Every sound seemed round, nothing harsh, nothing urgent. Only rhythm, only being. He walked slowly, not from age, but from reverence. Each step was placed with care, not because the ground was dangerous, but because it was sacred. He had not left to find something. He had left to stop being the one who was. Always holding on by midday, he had reached a grove of bamboo, tall, slender, patient. They swayed with the wind, never resisting, always yielding. He stood among them and listened. There was a strange silence in the bamboo, not absence of sound, but fullness of it. The rustle of leaves was like a whisper passed between sages. The creaking of the stalks, like bones shifting in ancient meditation. He closed his eyes and let the sounds move through him. No chants, no mantras, just the wind speaking in a language without words. He remained still for what could have been an hour or a day. Time loosened its grip, softened its rules. Eventually, he sat beneath one of the wider stalks and placed his palms on the soil. He whispered, "You bend, but do not break." The bamboo answered with another rustle, as if nodding as the sun drifted. West Ananda moved again, crossing through shallow creeks, over moss-covered stones, beneath hanging branches. His sandals were soaked, his robe flecked with dirt, but he felt no discomfort, only presence. Each leaf he passed became a teacher, each stone a sutra, each insect buzz a bell-ringing truth. That night he slept beneath the open sky, the stars, like old friends blinking behind thin clouds. The ground was uneven, but his breath was even. He had no pillow, but his head found rest. And in the dream that followed, the bowl returned, but not as a thing, as a void. In the dream he reached into a river and pulled out nothing. Only water slipped through his fingers, and yet he felt full. He turned in the dream to see his master standing beside him. Not old, not young, just clear. The master said nothing, only held out his empty hands, and Ananda, in the dream, wept, not from grief, but gratitude. He awoke before dawn, tears still clinging to his cheeks. Above him, a single star refused to fade with the coming light. He walked again, but now, with each step, he began to notice something strange. He was not seeking, he was not remembering, he was not even meditating. He was simply there, just a man walking through a forest. No longer a monk, no longer a student, no longer a keeper of some sacred thing. No role, no weight. At a stream, he knelt to drink, cupping his hands. For a brief second, he felt the phantom of the bowl, the instinct to reach for it, and then he let it pass. His hands held the water just fine. He drank slowly, letting it run down his chin. The river had never needed the bowl. It had never asked to be contained. It flowed, with or without witness, and so could he. He remained in the forest for 3 days. Each night he slept where his feet stopped. Each morning he rose with no plan but to follow the curve of the land. He spoke to no one, but never felt alone. He heard nothing, but never felt silence. His hunger was gentle, his thoughts quieter now, his memories soft around the edges. Even the image of the bowl began to fade, not like a wound healing, but like a fog lifting. On the 4th day he came to a clearing dot. In the center stood a tree, crooked, gnarled, shaped like a question asked 1,000 years ago. Its bark peeled in elegant strips. Its shadow was small, but complete. Ananda sat beneath it. He did not think. He did not try to stop thinking. He simply sat. Birds came and went. Clouds moved overhead. The sun warmed one cheek, then the other. He placed his hands, palms up, on his knees. He looked down at them, empty, wrinkled, alive. A wind passed through the clearing. Not cold, not cold, not warm, only exact. And in that wind, Ananda felt something release, not from his body, not from his mind, but from some place older than both. He did not smile. He did not cry. He simply was. It was time to return. There was no sign, no voice from the forest, no final vision to mark the end of the journey. Just a simple, silent knowing, the kind that came not from the mind, but from a place beneath thought, where stillness becomes language. Ananda rose from beneath the tree, brushing leaves from his robe, and began walking back toward the river. But this time, it was not to reclaim, not to search. He walked not like a monk returning home, nor like a man seeking closure, but like the wind returning to the valley, because it always would. The path home felt shorter, or perhaps he had grown longer. The trees whispered familiar greetings. The stones he had once cursed, for their sharpness now seemed like old friends, unmoved but softened in his presence. Even the birdsong felt lighter, as though the sky itself had taken a deep breath in his absence and exhaled peace upon his return. When he emerged from the forest and saw the river again, it was as if nothing had changed. And that was the miracle, because he stood at the top of the stone steps, leading down to the river bank, the same steps he had walked for decades, the same water flowing eastward, the same spot where the bowl had slipped, but something was different, and it wasn't in the river. It was in his hands. They were empty, and they were enough. He walked slowly down the steps and knelt at the water's edge. He cupped his hands and scooped the cool current into his palms, just as he had before. He held it there, not tightly, not with expectation, just held. The water spilled through his fingers in gentle strands, but this time he didn't chase it. He watched it fall and smiled. The river, too, seemed to smile, rippling softly. In rhythm with his breath, he closed his eyes. A breeze brushed his cheeks. The scent of wet earth rose around him. Time stretched wide, and within that space, something inside him whispered, "You have let go." He sat on the bank until the sun reached its peak, warming his back, kissing his scalp with light. From where he sat, the river appeared endless. Not just long, but eternal. A mirror of impermanence, yes, but also a reminder of return. It never stopped, never held, never grieved. It simply became, and so would he. At some point, a small child's voice called from the opposite bank, Ananda. Opened his eyes to see a village boy chasing a goat along the edge, laughing as it darted through the tall grass. Life, unchanged. Moving forward, without ceremony, without permission, just being. He stood again, not slowly, not stiffly, but with the quiet strength of someone who has walked into himself and found shelter. He placed his palms together in a gesture of gratitude, not toward the sky, nor the river, nor the forest, but inward, to the self he had held too tightly, and to the self that had finally let go. As he turned to climb the steps back toward his hut, his shadow fell across the river like a bridge. He paused, and in the shimmering water below, he saw no bowl, only light, only reflection, only this. Back at his hut, he swept the floor, dusted the stones, and lit a small stick of sandalwood incense. The smoke curled upward, free of shape, free of destination. He placed nothing at the altar. There was nothing to place, and that, he realized, was the offering that evening. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree once more, legs crossed, hands resting open, in his lap. Not in prayer, not in expectation, just in presence. The stars began to blink awake, shy and distant. A night bird called out somewhere behind him. The world settled into its usual rhythm of darkness and breath, and Ananda, without a bowl, without a past, without a need, smiled, not because he understood everything, but because he no longer needed to. The bowl is gone, he whispered, but I remain, and what remains is enough.